The audio for this video was recorded before the most recent balance data slate for Warhammer 40k. While the points changes in these lists might not exactly line up, the thought process behind how we get there is the same. Hey everyone, this is Tyler. To thank you all for reaching 1,000 subs, I wanted to give you a special video detailing the steps you'll need to take in order to build a list for success. This video isn't going to be like our previous content where we focus on building a list for as cheap as possible. Instead, I will be focusing on teaching you how to build a list with your favorite models from the game or lore. Then we'll plan around that so that we can show up to a table to play. We don't just get rolled over and we can have a full, enjoyable game with our opponent with the models that we like. Today, I'm going to be taking a player who is newer to 40k and is very familiar with a lot of the lore in some of the games, but has not played any games of 10th edition, and I'm going to be helping him build a list based on factions that he thinks are cool and characters and units that he wants to play around.
Hey everyone, my name's Alex. I go by Kaifus on YouTube, and I make a lot of guides for Darktide, but I've been interested in 40k for a long time. I've been an avid follower of the lore. I read all the books, and one of my favorite factions is Black Templar. So Tyler's here to help me with building a list that I can have fun with and still not get rolled over at a tournament.
Now, Alex, you currently do not have any armies completed, right? You're working on building up your first army?
I have about 700 points of Astra Militarum built right now, but no Black Templars at the moment.
Okay, so if you're working towards Astra Militarum, why did you pick Black Templars for the video that we're going to be doing today?
I just think Black Templars are such an iconic Space Marine unit, and one of the main reasons I picked them was because of a book called Hell's Reach. It's a book that just really highlights a lot of their key characters, and being able to see those characters on the tabletop just wrecking havoc just sounds really appealing to me. So Astra Militarum is an extremely expensive army. Space Marines is a little easier to collect, so I'm considering picking them up.
All right, so when we start a list and we think about the armies that we want to work with, we've got two primary styles that we want to consider. We want to decide whether or not we're going to be focusing on a list that is going to be very heavily focused on board control, scoring, secondary objectives, and all of that. Or if we want to go all in on a list where we just focus on killing, maiming, and burning our opponents alive. Now, we want to make sure that we do have some combination of both. You can't win a game just by tabling your opponent, and you can't win a game if you can't punch back. But we kind of want to decide which one is more important to us. So what are you thinking that you want to go with?
Well, if we're going with the Black Templars, we got to focus a little bit more heavily on that maim, kill, burn. Purge the heretic, the mutant, and the Xenos in holy fire. So that's the direction I'd want to go start.
Okay, and so with that in mind, the next thing that we've got to figure out is what detachment do you want to run? I know that Space Marines specifically have a lot of options. We're seeing a lot of success with the Iron Storm detachment. We can also go with something like the Salamander's flavored detachment, the Gladius detachment. We can go with the Black Templar specific detachment. Which one are you thinking?
Well, as a new player to the hobby, I have no illusions about going into a tournament and just winning off the bat. It's too much of an ask, so I'm not that worried about picking the most optimal detachment for winning games. I really just would want my models to have abilities that kind of resonate with their lore, and so with that reason, I think we got to go with the Crusade Force, right?
So since we're deciding that we want to go with the Righteous Crusaders and we want to take that as our detachment, what are some of the things that are kind of that must run for you, right? What are the units that are inspiring you to make this list the way that you are making it? And what are some other units that you think are just too cool to leave out?
Both for the cool factor and the utility on the table, what they actually bring. There's 3 characters I'd like, and 2 vehicles. For the characters, I really want to have Grimaldus. He's the chaplain of the chief recrusiarch of the Black Templars. He's got a lot of really cool abilities. He's just an awesome character from the lore with a lot of really badass lines, and I just really like him as a character. So he's one I definitely want to have. Next up, we got to take the High Marshal himself, Helbrecht. He's a beast in combat. He's got a really cool model, and I could just see him leading a squad of big beefy Black Templars up the board, and that just would feel really fun to me. Last of the characters, I really like to take the Emperor's Champion, because again, the model is just so beautiful. It's such a cool model, and the lore behind what the Emperor's Champion is just really compelling. It's, it's the best swordsman in the task force at the moment, and whenever he dies, they have another swordsman pick up his sword and continue on. So those are the three characters I'd like to bring. For the other two units, I really like Land Raiders. I just think they're awesome. They're these big, beefy transport tanks that can still hit really hard, and they can fit a whole bunch of Templars inside of them. And then lastly, I'm a big fan of Dreadnoughts, especially the new Primaris Dreadnoughts, so I'd like to have at least one in the list just because I think the models are really cool.
All right, yeah, all of that makes sense. They're all super cool units. Now, there's a couple of things that we will want to keep in mind as we're taking this list and kind of moving forward with it. Number one, we would want to naturally be under the assumption that we're building a list out of the units that we own. Now, you do not own any Black Templars, and many of the people watching this video might not have all of the units that they're interested in. So I want to take this quick little moment to plug a game called Tabletop Simulator. It is $20 on Steam. There's a Warhammer 40k mod that you can download for it, and you can go and play Warhammer 40k online with any model you want, however many times you want, for the low price of $20 for the one-time purchase. But, like I said, we're going to assume that we have every single character, every single unit, every single model that the Black Templars have ever owned, and we have unlimited choice. There is no budget constraint or anything like that going on with what we're choosing. Now, when we're sitting down and we're making a list, even if we want to have a melee-heavy army like Black Templars sound like you want them to be, we do need to make sure that we have some level of shooting threat in order to keep other shooting armies in check. I can't tell you how many times I've shown up to a table with my Tau and ran into an army that the only shooting they had was bolters at 24 inches, and I just stood out in the open and cleared them off the table because I had nothing to be afraid of. They physically could not counterpunch me at all. Thankfully, the Land Raider and the Redemptor Dread are going to already kind of fill that role of being that ranged counterpunch for us. If we wind up having space in the list near the end, we might want to look at picking up a couple more shooting platforms just to kind of balance us out, but we've got a really, really good core there to start.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Tabletop Simulator, because even though I don't have any Black Templars models, I have played with Black Templars as an army quite a few times in 9th edition on Tabletop Simulator. So that's how I know the rules for the units and stuff like that. It's just that, now I'm finally able to start collecting models, so I'm really grateful that Tyler's here to help us out with that.
All right, so let's go ahead and let's take these 5 basic units and let's figure out what the core of our list that we're going to be building around is. Now, obviously, we know that we're going to be including these units, but just because there is a unit that you really want to run doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be that core of your army. If you were running Tau, you might be looking at a Crisis Brick with a Commander and a Cold Star. You might be looking at 2 Devilfish and Breachers as the kind of core of your army and then building up around that. For Custodes, you might be starting off with lots of Custodian Guard and knowing you want Trajan Valoris, but in reality, the core of your list is going to be 5 Alaris with a Shield Captain. When we're looking at the Black Templars, what I'm thinking that we're going to be wanting to do is kind of keep it on theme and on brand and try to use Black Templar specific units as that core fighting power of our army. So because of that, I think what we're going to do is we're going to bring 3 units of Primaris Sword Brethren. They're thematic, they're good, they're melee, they're going to get up in there and they are going to shred things up. And overall, I think that it's going to fit pretty nicely with the ideas that you have here.
Yeah, the Sword Brethren are great units, and like you said, they're very thematic. But just to inject a little bit of lore here, the Sword Brethren are like the most renowned weapon masters in the Black Templar. It's a kind of a place of honor that they get, so that's why they're kind of beefy and powerful.
Now, one of the problems that we can see with Primaris Sword Brethren when we look at them is that they do have kind of a slow movement speed. They're really scary when they can get into melee, and they're pretty durable with their 3 wounds, but they just don't get up the board very quick. So we need to give them transport support in order to be able to make the most out of them. Now, thankfully, the Land Raider that you want to include is going to have a maximum carry capacity of 14. So what we can actually do is we can run one of the Primaris Sword Brethren units as a 10-man give them the lieutenant as a little addition that we can make to the list, who will have Tannhauser's Bones. This will give them a 5-up feel no pain if you have the correct detachment rule set up. It'll give them lethal hits. It'll give them fall back and charge and shoot, meaning that we're not going to be having to worry about this big, expensive unit getting tied up. But then we can also pair them with Helbrecht at the same time because of the rules that lieutenants have when joining units. This means that suddenly we're getting lethal hits on 5s. We're getting additional strength on the weapons. We are going to really be amping up the power of this unit. But the problem is that we only have one transport. We really need to be able to get the rest of these Primaris Sword Brethren up the board. So what I'm thinking we look at is we look at taking a Black Templar Impulsor in order to take a 5-man along with the Emperor's Champion up the board. Now, the Black Templar Impulsor is going to be able to disembark troops after advances, so it's going to be able to move a lot faster than the Rhino is going to be able to do. The only reason that we're not going to be taking a third transport for you is Captain Grimaldus takes up quite a few spots because he's actually a 4-model unit. The other thing is Grimaldus is really getting a lot of his power out of his command phase ability, which requires him to be on the board in the command phase. If you're in a vehicle, you're not on the board in your command phase. So we're going to be making Grimaldus walk around with his Primaris unit. So he's going to be getting to the board a little bit slower, but he's going to be able to be pretty potent on his way up the board, just in case other things are, moving up to him.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Also, I get to have my nice shiny Grimaldus model on the table. All the better.
Yeah, plus you get to load up a bunch of Primaris in the back of a pickup truck.
Oh, why do you have to remind me of that?
Yeah, because the Impulsor is a pickup truck, and I have to see it, and now you have to see it. So when we go and we look at the core that we have for the list now, we're sitting at about 1,470 points. This is usually what the core of a list is going to look like. We're going to have Grimaldus, Helbrecht, the Champion, a Lieutenant, 20 Sword Brethren, the Redeemer, the Redemptor Dread, and an Impulsor. From here, we've got to figure out what we're going to do with the remaining 500 points of the list that we have. Now, the problem that I'm seeing with this list right now is that we don't have anything that plays the mission particularly well. We don't have anything that wants to go be the sacrificial trash unit that we just throw away to score extra points. We don't have anything that wants to just sit on an objective all game and do nothing else. And we don't really have anything that can potentially come in as a deep strike. So we've got to try to figure out some solutions for that. So what I'm thinking that we might want to look at is we might want to consider running some scout squads. Now, what's nice about scout squads is even though they don't have their kits out yet, we can actually kit bash scout squads out of the Crusader box that we can get for Black Templar specifically, which is kind of a nice little benefit. The robed Crusaders kind of having the same general appearance as a scout squad. We're going to be running 3 units of them just so that we can make sure that we can get a very consistent screen across our opponent. If we go first, the scout squad can very easily charge into our opponent on turn 1, tie up vehicles, and buy us space to really command that mid board. If we go second, we can pull them back, just have them hold objectives, maybe be ready to move up the board to do a tactical on the next turn. Whatever kind of support role we need them to do. At 55 points, they're a lot cheaper than, the 140 point Primaris Sword Brethren. And so being able to just throw them out there and have them do whatever we need them to do is perfect.
They're basically like super Catachans.
Yeah, you could kind of think of them like that for sure. Being able to infiltrate and scout in one is insanely powerful. It is so good. Now, what we're also going to need is something that can hold our backline. Now, we could commit one of the 5-man scout squads to holding that backline objective, but it might not be the best place for them since they have all these cool tools for being able to be up in the front of the board. So what I think we're going to do is we're just going to pick up a regular boring intercessor squad. The intercessor squad, 85 points. It doesn't necessarily do a ton, but what it will do is objective secure for our home objective so that they can also move off of the point and come help out later in the battle if they need to. If they get blown up by indirect fire, we'll still hold the objective. They can sit on the objective and then move off of it to go screen deep strikes from the opponent so that the opponent can't deep strike into our objective. Just kind of a good, cheaper backline unit that's not going to take away too much power from the rest of our list.
Plus, that Black Templar paint scheme be looking nice.
Yeah, I just don't want to imagine drawing those white crosses.
They're Crusaders. They need to have it.
Yeah, but can you imagine painting white on black? That sounds like a nightmare.
It does.
The last thing that I'm going to be looking at for this kind of mission playing section is we're going to go ahead and grab one unit of Inceptors. Now, Inceptors are going to have a 3-inch deep strike, so they can come in substantially closer than anything else. They're not going to be able to make any charges, and their guns aren't the most scary thing in the world. They can pick up some cheap deep scout or deep strike screening units. They can do good objective play, potentially sneak in and steal a backline objective. But the really nice thing about them is they really are just kind of impossible to screen out entirely. If you get behind enemy lines, you get deploy teleport homers, you get engage on all fronts, you can very easily fit these units wherever you need them to go.
They're also perfect for killing things like that backline intercessor squad.
Yeah, in case you run into an enemy unit that is wanting to, or an enemy army that is also running intercessors, you can take these Inceptors, drop them 3 inches away, and then just go take the objective on the next turn. Now, we've got ourselves at a really, really good point here, right? We've got a good core of killing units. We've got a good little support system of cheaper units and units that have very specific roles for playing the mission. The problem right now is we have about 170 points left to spend with this army. So here's where we get to make a really important decision. Do we want to play even more towards the objective game and even more towards being able to have the sustained tactical objectives turn after turn after turn, or do we want to go towards more killing power and more general threat? If we want to go down the route of having more support units for playing the objective, what we might want to look at is picking up 2 units of assault intercessors with jetpacks. They are infantry, so they can move through buildings super easily. They have a 12-inch move, so they are zooming around the board. They have fly, so you can't tie them up as easily. They don't kill super hard. They can do okay into something like a horde of guardsmen or a horde of termagants. But that's really about the extent of what they're going to kill. But at 85 points, with that kind of movement and with the ability to go through walls, they can go anywhere you need on the board. They can tie up enemy units to stop progression. They can go score those tacticals. They can go zoom around and hold objectives that your opponent might not think you'd be able to get to. They've got a lot of flexibility. Now, the other option, if we want to go a little bit more killy, is we can add in some extra shooting, which I mentioned earlier in the video. Now, if we go and we take a Black Templar Gladiator Lancer, they're going to be able to reroll a hit roll, reroll a wound roll, and reroll a damage roll when it's shooting at its targets. This is really powerful with the fact that it basically has a super las gun on top of it. It's got its Icarus rocket pods, it's got multi-meltas, it's got storm bolters. This thing is going to be able to provide a lot of covering fire. The only problem is it's not going to be able to move up the board as easily, it's not going to be able to hold objectives as easily, it's not going to be able to tie things up as easily, but it is going to have a lot more of that raw killing power. So for the list that you're looking at, which one do you think you like the idea of more?
Well, that's a tough choice because I think that the Assault Intercessors really kind of plays into that thematic Black Templars list. They don't really care a lot for their personal safety, so everybody charging up the board does sound good, but at the same time, it's a good idea to have that covering fire. And with how powerful the Gladiator Lancer is, especially in Black Templars, that extra multi-melta, probably go with the Gladiator Lancer, just give them a little bit of support and make target priority a little bit more difficult for the opponent.
All right. And so if we were to take this list and play it on the table, right, we would want to figure out a good general strategy for this list. It's probably going to look something like scout squads, maybe two of them, potentially all three being deployed up front, trying to prevent any other scouts from blocking our movement, trying to prevent the enemy from making pregame moves, potentially being able to go in and tie up a Chaos Rhino to stop CSM from moving up the board, or, being able to go and hide on an objective and just kind of be in a good spot to do a counter charge on the next turn. After that, we're probably going to be looking at the 10-man Primaris Sword Brethren inside the Redeemer, along with the Lieutenant and the Helbrecht. We're going to be having the Impulsor carrying around the Champion with another 5-man Primaris squad. Grimaldus, again, he's going to be walking around doing his best, but he's probably going to get there a little bit late. And then we're going to be having the Inceptor squad up in Deep Strike, ready to come down wherever we need them. And we're going to be having the Redeemer kind of chilling in the back with some longer range weapon fire, along with the Gladiator Lancer, and providing that long range covering fire.
Sounds like a good plan to me. A little bit of everything.
Yeah, and when you're building your lists, unless you're trying to go for some kind of a heavy skew, that really is kind of what you need, is a little bit of everything. If you go into a list and you decide, I just want to focus on killing vehicles, that might be great when you match up into Imperial Knights, but it's probably not too great when you run into that Tyranid player running 120 Gaunts.
Or just Chaos Space Marines.
But on the other hand, if you run nothing except for super cheap scoring units, you might run into an issue when you run into Eldar, who can just kill entire armies with their indirect fire.
Cowardly Xenos.
But overall, that's kind of the whole process. You find out what it is that you want to have be that starting point for your army. You figure out what needs to be there for that army to support, or to support those key units in your army, and then you just figure out what you need to do for the last little bits. I tend to prefer a more aggressive killing style army that has some scoring, as opposed to going with a very, very heavy board objective style, but either one is fine, and at the end of the day, you do need to have some combination of durability, speed, power, and cheap stuff you can just throw away.
I'd also think you need a little bit of, you need a big punchy unit to at least try to kill big things, because, if you don't have the ability to kill Mortarion or Angron, they're just going to murder your whole army.
Well, I mean, even if you kill Angron, he's probably going to come back and kill you again anyways, so
it is
does that really even count?
It's his favorite thing to do, for sure.
But hopefully you all feel like you learned something today. These are very, very fun videos to make, but they can take up a lot of time, so I appreciate all of the feedback and positive comments and subs that you guys have been sending my way. It really does mean a lot when I get some of that really good constructive feedback, and I'm able to make my videos better because of it. Alex, thank you so much for joining me on this video today. I hope that this got you excited to potentially consider going on to Tabletop Simulator or something like that, trying out some Black Templar, and trying out 10th edition for the first time. If you've got anything you want to plug, any socials, any content, go ahead.
Well, appreciate you having me on, and yeah, I'll be giving this a shot on Tabletop Simulator for sure. It's a lot of fun to be able to try out different armies before you spend, thousands of dollars on them. But yeah, anyway, if y'all have any interest in other kind of 40k content, feel free to check out my YouTube channel at Kaifus Darktide, where I post guides for Warhammer 40k Darktide. If you're an Imperial Guard player, I would 100% recommend checking out that game, because it's the only game I've found that lets you actually feel like a guardsman, and you will die like a guardsman a lot. But yeah, thanks Tyler for having me on, and yeah, I wish you all the best. This has been a lot of fun.
Yep, and I will see the rest of you in the next video. Have a good rest of your day.